Have you ever tried making Mokume Gane patterns in polymer clay? In this class, I'll give you a new twist on a fun technique and show how to use your pattern canes to make polymer clay flowers. Hi there, Sandy Huntress here. I recorded this original footage early in 2018, and I was inspired by Pantone's announcement that their color of the year was ultraviolet. It seems to me that anytime the color of the year is purple, that can't be a bad thing. They also put out a whole bunch of different palettes using the color ultraviolet. It fascinated me how you can have the same color and yet totally different looks with the colors you put around it. I was inspired when I saw this particular color palette that they called Intrigue. And so I decided to make my Mokume Gane in some of those colors. Although color palettes are somebody else's idea of what looks good together, it's certainly a great place to begin your own creativity and jumping off point for what you like. And I went through my clay colors and found actually 3 of the 4 colors in the palette I had clay colors straight from the manufacturer that would work. This is Sculpey Soufflé Royalty and Sculpey Soufflé Sea Glass. This is Premo 18 karat gold. And then this one I mixed. I'll have the recipe for it on the blog post. And looking at the colors, it occurred to me that to get nice Mokume Gane, you really want contrast. So I have some pearl and also some black that I mixed with 50% silver, just to get kind of, not such a flat black, but this one has a bit of sparkle. And I'll walk you through the steps of the Mokume Gane, but I will tell you that you might want to do some testing to get the most out of the colors that you've chosen. So I did just a few tests to see what I thought looked best. I had an idea in my mind, but in reality it actually turned out being different, which is why we do tests. So this particular piece of Mokume Gane uses just the 4 colors, the purple, the turquoise, the green, and the gold. And it's nice, but as I suspected, adding in the white really does so much more for it. These pieces over here are the 4 colors with the addition of pearl. And I just think it gives it some contrast and some more interest. This one is the 4 colors with the addition of that sparkly black. Now this might look better depending on the other colors you use. I think the black just kind of muddies and dulls down these colors, so I'm not a fan of it. And I was surprised to find that this one was not my favorite of the 4. I thought for certain having black and white for contrast would do the trick, but I'm not really in love with this. Oh, that's cool. I like that side. And what I did here, these bigger pieces, I cut off a slice and then ran it through the pasta machine just to get a thin, even slice. That's something you want to keep in mind, depending on how you plan to use your Mokume Gane, is the scale. I'm going to be making little bitty petals using this cutter. So you don't want to start with anything that's too big a scale, or you won't be able to get anything of interest in each piece. So by keeping it small, you keep each piece having a lot going on within it. So let me show you how to assemble the Mokume Gane. I love working on these ceramic tiles. They're just easy to move around, to pick up and turn around and do all sorts of things with. And they're most of the time around $1 at a store like Home Depot. So since I'm just making a small piece of jewelry, I'm just going to make a small piece of Mokume Gane. And a good way to start is just to use a cutter. It doesn't really matter what size it is, but just so that you start off with all consistent pieces. These are sheets of clay that were rolled out to the number 4 setting on my pasta machine, which is about a medium, 3 cards thick, 1.3 millimeters, I believe. Now, another thing you can spend time playing with is which colors you place next to which. I usually just place them for maximum contrast, but you might place them for blending. You might do a bit more of a gradient. Actually, I'm just going to do these in pairs. And I don't have my pasta machine down here in the recording studio. So I'm just going to roll each of these out until it's basically, if this is a number 4 setting, which it is, I would roll them through the pasta machine once more on the number 4 setting, just to thin down the pieces. And we'll do this with this one until they're about the same size. You can always stretch it a little. Beautiful. And I'll do the same with this, since it's an odd number. Again, I'm doing this to make these this thin. They're quite thin because of the scale of my project. If you were doing something bigger and chunkier, you may not need to. So now I have this stack. And again, if I had my pasta machine down here, I would roll it through once more on the number 4. But just to show you, you don't have to have a pasta machine. Although I can tell you that it was one of the first things I purchased when I decided to, I guess, get seriously into polymer clay. The way I got into polymer clay, well, a friend of mine had taught me how to do lamp working, lamp work beads. That's melting glass in a flame and making glass beads, and I loved it. I realized that I think my son, my youngest son, comes by his pyromania honestly, because when I sit down in front of a torch, I feel my heart rate drop. I just feel so calm and relaxed. It's a little scary. But I just loved it. But then my studio for lamp working ended up just not working out where it was located, and it got dismantled, and I had hopes that it would that I could get it back together, and years went by and it just didn't happen. And it was at that point that I realized that I'd been a quilter for years. I've done scrapbooking, I sew garments, and I realized that in every single one of those media, I always pursued the sculptural. And I realized that I wanted to sculpt. And so I went and revisited polymer clay, which I had done years before with my kids, and tried a few things. Here I am now. So now you can see I cut that into 9 pieces. It just was a good size for what I'm doing. Stack them all up. So we have all of these very thin layers. And now it's time to do the fun part, the Mokume Gane, which is just kind of making a mess. I love the look of the ripple blade, like on this one. I love the way that gives just an interesting look. So I'm going to do some lines, and if I could tell which was the sharp and which was the dull end, I think they're both sharp. I don't know. I would make a point of using the dull end because that just deforms the clay a little bit more. And I'm going to make sure to keep these lines small and close together. Don't worry if that comes apart, just put it together. We're going to kind of pack it together again in a bit. And I'm going to take my clay blade, and I'm actually flipping it over and being ever so careful to not press my fingers down on the sharp end. And just make some lines. That's interesting. What else do we have? I have a couple of mandrels to make different dots. That's fun. And again, I want to keep this scale pretty small, so I'm going to go in there tight with some tools. Smaller mandrel. I'll do needle tool holes in between those. I like the look of the dots. If you want to see some fantastic work that involves Mokume Gane, you should check out Julie Piccarello's book, Patterns in Polymer. She just does the most beautiful color combinations, and somehow the designs she uses, I can always tell it's a piece of her work. Here's something fun you can do. So I've got this plug that I sort of made. That's no big deal. I'm going to pop it out, and I'm just going to turn it. And I'm not going to put it back in exactly where it was. So that's sort of fun. And I'll do that one crossing over the other one. So that makes a line. Crossing over. And maybe a dotting tool, which does a different kind of more of a sloped and more of a gradual look. So it will reveal different parts of the layers. I kind of like doing this, like these radiating lines coming out from round things. So you just kind of make a mess of your piece. Smashing and doing patterns in polymer. And there's really no right or wrong way. There are ways to get the effects you want. Move that out of the way so I don't wreck it. Now I'm going to take my clay blade and just use a finger on one side and the blade on the other. Now you can peel it up and keep turning it. And just kind of compact it together. I want it, it's kind of like reducing a cane. If you call this a cane, and as it flares out, make sure I kind of angle my blade so that my sides are straight. So it all is the same scale. And you don't need much. Probably you could get the petals you want from 2 or 3 slices, depending on how thinly you roll it down. Oh, and I had these. Well, that's fine. Just whatever you have. Any kind of tools that you have that will make a mark, make an impression. Go ahead and play with them and experiment and see what works. Now you can do this with your clay blade, but I happen to have the Lucy clay slicer. So I'll just put this right up against the blade of the slicer. And then advance it. I'm going to make these sort of thick, and of course the first one, that's cool, I like that. The first one is irregular, although it was the first ends that I used in all those examples I showed you. You can just run this through the pasta machine and flatten it out. And if you want to know more about using this tool, I did a Friday Findings video. I'm going to thin these just a little bit more in my pasta machine. So I'm probably going to cut 3 or 4 slices. I apologize, this was out of screen on you. Of course it's cool because there's 2 sides, so you can pick the side you like. And you can see there's actually plenty left here. This slicer is really nice for not letting you waste your cane. So I'm going to run these through my pasta machine. I'm not sure what thickness they are, but whatever thickness they are, I'm going to run them through basically on the next setting down in one direction, and then click it down one more setting, turn them 90 degrees and run them through the other, just to minimize the distortion and get them nice and thin so that I can carefully select the areas I want for my finished piece. Here are my pieces all rolled out, and you can see this one was that end piece, and you can see how much it distorts because it was so much thicker. So the thicker the piece is, the more distortion you get. So before you start making your piece, you have to decide what shape do you want your flower petals to be. This is the Sculpey mini geometric cutter set. I think that's what it's called. And there are lots of possibilities right on here. You could use the heart shape. You could use this one, although it might be a little thick in the middle. This one would be pretty. This marquee shape would make really pretty petals all around. Or big fat teardrops. Even the diamonds would make a pretty interesting flower. But as you saw earlier, I decided I was going to use this one. And I decided that by actually pulling out several pieces and just doing some experimenting earlier and testing and deciding which I thought looked best. It's all a matter of taste. But this is a great set to have. Next, you'll want some base clay because we don't need to make the entire petal out of our nice Mokume Gane. And this is just some leftover clay from the mixing. It took me a while to mix this color, so I had a bit of extra. This is a sheet of it rolled on the number 1, and then this is a sheet rolled on the number 3. And these two together, I'm just going to kind of put it together like that, smooth it so I don't trap any air bubbles. I found these two together was a good thickness for what I wanted. And again, I experimented and tested, and that's how I came to that conclusion. Next, I'm just going to place my veneers on the clay, and we'll see how many petals we get out of each one. And you've probably seen this trick before. If not, it's so cool. This is plastic wrap, and you just place that over. I like to make sure it's smooth so I don't make any wrinkles in my piece. And make sure the sharp side of the cutter is down and you're cutting through all 3 layers. And make sure you get all the way to the bottom. And yeah, sometimes it gets, oops, stuck in there. Well, rats. What do I have that will be gentle? I don't want to dent my piece. Rats. Oh, I made a mess of that one. Alright. Oh well, that one's a sacrifice. Let's try again. Smooth the plastic. That, you know, in all my tests, that did not happen. Push straight down and pull straight up. There. And sometimes the plastic sticks, but I never had it stick in the cutter like that. I think I can get one more out of this piece. Straight down, make sure you get all the way. It's just easier to have a clean edge. All the way to the tile and then straight up. And if you pull it off carefully, you ought to be able to avoid leaving the plastic on there. But if not, just use a nail to kind of peel it up. So with my testing, I figured I need 7. So I'm just going to continue cutting these out until I have my 7 petals. So I had a couple more stick on me, and I figured out a couple of things. First of all, if you see that it's going to stick, don't try to lift it up really quick. Lift it up slowly, and you can often use the edges of the plastic that is still attached to pull it out. I got kind of annoyed when the next one stuck, and I grabbed a couple of scraps and stuffed them in there on top of that and tried pushing it out that way, and that worked to push it out without damaging the shape much. We're going to put something in the center, so if you need to peel up the plastic, do it from the center. So let me show you another one. So see, it's stuck in there. Oh. Okay. So I'm going to take these pieces of clay, stuff them on top of it, and then use my tool. And now I can smooth it out while the plastic is still on there, so I won't get fingerprints. And then peel up the plastic from the center. Once you have your pieces all cut out, you could take a little time to just gently clean up the edges with your fingers. One thing that occurred to me it might be fun to do, because I mentioned earlier that the edges of these stacks look really cool, would be to use something like this for the base. So maybe a piece that you didn't love the outside of too much, you could certainly use as the base and have that kind of interesting stripe on the outside. So just make these all nice. Most of them, if you make sure to cut all the way down to the tile, they come out good. I had one that was a little ragged, probably because I didn't cut all the way down to the tile. I just love that soft, rounded edge you get by using the plastic wrap. Next, I have some of the base clay that I rolled out on a fairly thin, I think like a 5 or a 6 setting. And I'm just going to cut out a small circle, and I'm actually going to use the plunger to mark the center. That's not the center. Well, you get the idea. And that will just be the base that my petals go on. So don't press them on too firmly, because you may need to rearrange them to get the spacing right. Oh, now that's looking really cool. I like that a lot. If you are enjoying this tutorial, be sure to thank my patrons. They are the only reason I am still making videos on YouTube. And if you haven't already, consider joining us for up to 2 bonus tutorials every month. And to my patrons, thank you, thank you. You are so wonderful. I love you all. And I'm just going to take this big ball tool and kind of press them lightly in the center. So you could make these a little smaller if you had, and of course not as thick, and make earrings. You could make them bigger and make a pendant. Now you can use your imagination for what you want to put in the center. I'm going to keep it fairly simple. I had thought that maybe a button would look cute pressed in the center, but I didn't really have any small enough that I liked. So I've just got a small circle of the gold clay. And I'll put that down as a base. And this is a little tedious, but I do love the look of just a pile of little tiny balls. If you want, you can add a finding for hanging now. I'd recommend baking it first and then adding your finding after so you don't risk distorting your shape. And then you can do whatever you want with this. Attach it to a ring blank, add something to hang it for a pendant, use it to decorate a box. As I've said many times in my videos, just use this as a jumping off point for your imagination and your own creativity. So I realized after I recorded that last segment that I had forgotten about what I planned to do with this piece. And so what I did was I actually pulled off all those little balls and baked it just as it was. So it was something like these, which I did also, just trying out some of the other cutter shapes. The idea was to have a flat top so that I could sand and buff it and polish it, because doing that is what really helps bring out the gorgeous shine and shimmer of the metallics that we used. So it would just be such a pain to sand it with those little balls in the way, and besides we need to finish the back for a nice finish. What I have here is a stack of sanding sponges. Now I despise sanding. Yes, Sandy hates sanding. But I've come to realize that there are times when it's important. And I made this set of sanding sponges based on a tutorial that Cindy Leitz gave on using fun foam and doing it, and so I said, you know, I need to do that, and I did, and I've used them a couple times for a couple projects. I don't love doing it, but I do like the results. I am no expert on sanding, but the idea is that once you take down the major stuff, every successive piece of sandpaper is taking down the ridges left from, or the scratches left by the previous one. So 400 is more coarse than 600. So 600 is going to knock down the high points left by 400. And then you just work your way through. Again, I'm no expert on sanding. Ginger Davis Allman has done a tutorial on sanding and buffing. I haven't looked at it yet, but I have no doubt that it's excellent. But this has worked for me. Most of my stuff is textural and doesn't require sanding. Phew. But sometimes it does. So what I did with this piece was, before I put all the little balls on, I sanded it down to 5,000. Maybe not necessary, but the pack of sandpaper that I got went that high, so I just did that. And then I buffed it with a piece of denim, and then I added some Renaissance wax, and you can see it's got this really pretty shine. Now I didn't even try to get down the sides, I just got the top, but can you see the difference between these two? I think you can. Oh yes, the camera's catching it. Just that beautiful shine that gives some depth to the metallics. I'm really pleased with it. Then I added a backing, and for that you just need a thin sheet of clay, and I like to use a texture sheet, and I love to run these through the pasta machine to get the best texture. So as a release I use Armor All, and honestly that's plenty. Barely a squirt, Spread it over the entire surface of the sheet of clay. That's the secret, is to put it on your clay. Because if you put it on your texture sheet, you're just going to end up with it uneven. You're not guaranteed it's going to be where you want it to be. So put it on the clay, and then you know the entire surface is covered. For these texture sheets, I run it through the pasta machine on the same setting that I ran the sheet through. So this was, I think, a 4, a medium thin setting. And just feed it in and run it through. Leave yourself some space at the end because it will grow a little. And you'll end up with a piece something like this. A really beautiful, deep texture, although it probably won't stay that deep. You could see I did the back of this one, and it softened up a bit just because I had to manipulate it. Next, to finish your back, you want to spread some liquid clay on the back. That's important to get a bond. So spread a nice thin coat of any brand of liquid clay. Place your piece down and use a craft knife to cut as neatly as you can around these. Take your time because you'll save yourself a lot of trouble and aggravation afterwards in trying to get this smooth. If you just take your time cutting this out neatly, and then once you have it cut out, you can use a tool like this to help smooth out the edges. I use this a lot on this one for getting in these spaces and smoothing it out. So then you have a nice professional finish on the back instead of just leaving it looking like this. Now here's a tip for you. If you want to do the sanding and buffing step, I don't know if you can see how uneven these are. Do attempt, look at that, yikes. Do make your pieces all the same thickness. I think I was using some scrap here. I just wanted to try out the heart shape, and that's really pretty, but it would be really tough to sand this with this one being so thick beside it. And it's at this point you can now add some TLS to the center and add your little balls or your decoration. If you want to press something in, like I mentioned before, like a button or something, what I would suggest is that you press it into your piece before you bake it to leave the impression so you have it right where you want it, then take it out. Don't bake it with it in there, and that way you'll still be able to do your sanding and finishing. And then the final step is just a little Renaissance wax. Now I sanded this one, so let's see what the Renaissance wax does. You need, I tell you, the smallest amount of this stuff. And it says it dries immediately, but I find it's better if I walk away, go do something, come back maybe 5 or 10 minutes later. Oh yeah, that looks better already. And then you just buff it. This was the one with the 4 colors and the black clay. Still kind of muddy looking. I definitely like this one better. Now that you've seen how to do this, you'll want to check out my Mokume Gane playlist. It's only 2 additional videos, but showing you other ways you can use this beautiful pattern technique in polymer clay.